Joining me now is the Conservative MEP, and you get described as this all the time, don't you? Arch-Brexiteer, Dan Hannan. He's with me in the studio. This wasn't really in the script, was it? All these wonderful new freedoms, the liberation that follows from shrugging off the shackles of Brussels. And the first thing the Prime Minister does is break bread with a self-proclaimed protectionist.
Well, with a view to getting a trade deal between the largest and the fifth largest economies on the planet, which will be of huge benefit to both. You know, it's 1 million Brits every day who turn up to work for American companies, 1 million Americans who work for British companies. We're the single biggest investor there, they're the single biggest investor here. The only thing that hasn't followed up until now has been the trade, because the trade has been controlled by Brussels rather than by us. And that can now change. And there are, as far as I can see, there are almost no losers and there are a lot of winners, including, by the way, our European allies.
It's a glass three-quarters full for you, then, on this one. Are you worried about any of the sort of slightly less savoury elements of the election campaign and seeing the British Prime Minister essentially, post-Brexit, having to go there and make friendly noises?
I was not a Trump supporter, but...
Are you now?
No, look, I mean, it seems to me that the only proper attitude for a friend of America and a friend of American democracy is to say, you've made your decision, and this remains a powerful alliance. And
whoever's in the White House?
Well, as long as America remains committed to the values of the West, then this is our one key alliance. It has been since 1941, you know. And
you mentioned 1941. He seems, we haven't got the detail of the executive order yet, but it looks as though he may have signed a ban on refugees on Holocaust Remembrance Day. How does that play with Western values?
There were all sorts of aspects of his platform that I disliked, and there are lots of things that, you know, as I say, I wouldn't have voted for the guy. And I don't resolve from any of the things I said about him. But Theresa May's job is not to go and lecture him and wag her finger. Her job is to get the best deal for us, and by implication, the best deal for the broader community of Western countries. And I think she did that today. She came out with this commitment on NATO, which will have delighted the Europeans. She slightly softened his position on the issue of sanctions on Russia. She hasn't just gone and played a kind of subordinate role at all. It's very clear that there's give and take. She's established her own vision of what the special relationship can be. And she's made relationships, by the way, not just with him. I mean, the US is a system with a divided government. And she's got very good relations with, you know... But she
saw an awful lot in a very short press conference down here.
Well, but she's been there also meeting, you know, the other leaders in Congress and so on. And this is going to be a key relationship, and it's bigger than any two leaders, you know.
Do you buy this conflation that's abroad now of Brexit with Trump, this claim by some that without Brexit there would be no Trump? And given, of course, as you say, your established rejection of much of what he said and stood for in the election campaign, do you feel, as the arch-Brexiteer, a degree of responsibility?
No, I think the parallel has been greatly overdone. I mean, a big part of Donald Trump's appeal, as I understand it, was that he didn't want free trade with China. Whereas you'll remember a big part of Vote Leave's argument was that we do want free trade with China. We can't get it while we're in the EU. So Brexit has a globalist and internationalist flavour that I don't think was there. The one thing they had in common, I'll concede this, was an anger against what was perceived to be a failed governing class. But I think it would be a mistake to see Brexit as being nativist or protectionist. I think it's much more about re-engagement with the wider world.
So, that said, do you think maybe there should have been a little bit of finger-wagging behind closed doors?
Well, I've no idea what happened behind closed doors.
But from
what I can only infer from what was said in front of those doors afterwards. And, you know, it was the issues that people had concerns about, NATO, Russia sanctions and so on, he seems slightly to have softened his position on.
I accept that you are not as enthusiastic about drawing the two together as some other Brexiteers are. Do you think the world's a safer place now that Donald Trump is in the White House?
Like I say, he wasn't my preferred candidate, but I think the world is a safer place when the English-speaking democracies work together for the rule of law.
The English-speaking democracies?
Yeah, I think the alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States has been a far greater guarantor of human freedom and happiness than anybody really likes to admit for the last 100 years. Imagine the world without it. You know, we think of these universal values now of free speech and equality for women and democracy. You know, there'd have been nothing universal about them if the Second World War had ended differently or if the Cold War had ended differently. And we should remember the value of that alliance and what it's done not just for us but for the other countries.
The alliance that was already extant, as opposed to any new sort of form of alliance.
But she has.
I just want to direct your view. I just want to direct your view to continental Europe, if I may. And one of the independent candidate for the French presidency said today that Britain lived in equilibrium with Europe. This is Emmanuel Macron, but now it is becoming a vassal state, meaning it is becoming the junior partner of the United States. We've gone from being a big player.
I mean, the absurdity of that is that the European Union is about political integration. It's about turning the countries into something bigger, a political union, whereas no country in the world is more jealous of its sovereignty than the United States. The idea that this could be other than an alliance of democracies, and I hope, by the way, one that goes wider, that brings in other friendly countries, the idea that we'd somehow be drawn into a political union with the United States.
English speaking, or would we allow non-English speakers into
and all friendly countries, you know, you know, there's so much virtue signalling, including from some British politicians who are indulging themselves by signalling their distaste for this or that aspect of Donald Trump's domestic policy.
But they might just feel distaste.
Well,
they might not
maybe
be
they do.
signaling.
Do you know what? But if they were Prime Minister and they were not engaging with the world's largest economy and our most important military ally, there would be a serious dereliction of their duty.
Daniel Hannan, thank you very much indeed. It would, however, seem that the spokespeople and cheerleaders who spent much of last year insisting that Trump should be taken seriously but not literally, or even that we should stop listening to his actual words and focus instead on what was in his heart, are going to need some new catchphrases.